What if the map we trust most is the one that tells the smallest story? We look at the Earth from above and imagine completion. Satellites sweep the continents. Roads, borders, coastlines, cities, rivers, everything appears named, measured, settled into place. Yet beneath that thin, familiar skin lies another world, one shaped not by certainty, but by absence. A world of shafts, chambers, flooded corridors, buried cities, and sealed ecosystems that have waited in darkness longer than memory can reach. For as long as human beings have stood at the mouths of caves, they have felt the same quiet contradiction. The opening is real, solid, undeniable, but what it suggests is larger than stone. A cave is never just a void in the ground. It is a threshold. It invites the oldest question we know how to ask. What lies beyond what we can see? Some of these places have inspired legends of underworlds, hidden libraries, or civilizations preserved beneath mountains. Others have yielded something stranger still, scientific facts that sound like myth. Life surviving without sunlight, rivers moving through cathedrals of rock, crystals growing to impossible size in heat no human body can bear, networks of tunnels that continue past the edge of our equipment, our lungs, our nerve. And so this story is not simply about caves. It is about the tension between discovery and humility, about the moments when the Earth reminds us that being modern is not the same as knowing everything. Each descent begins the same way. A narrow entrance, a beam of light, a human being stepping carefully into the dark. But what waits below is never just geology. It is memory, fear, wonder, and the unsettling possibility that the planet beneath us is far less familiar than the world we have built above it. Perhaps that is why these places stay with us. They do not just hide secrets. They expose the limits of our own certainty. What if the first doorway in this story was not a cave at all, but a rumor, deep enough to feel like stone? In the late 1990s, a voice on late-night radio described a place in rural Washington where the earth seemed to open without end. The caller said there was a hole on his land, old enough to have gathered local stories the way wells gather echoes. People had tossed things into it for years, he claimed, and never heard them land. In that silence, imagination rushed in. The story became known as Mel's Hole, though what made it endure was never just the alleged depth. It was the shape of the idea itself. A dark opening in ordinary ground. A place treated at first like a dump, then like a measurement problem, and finally like a threshold no instrument could fully explain. Line was lowered. Weights were tied on. The descent continued. The bottom, if there was one, remained absent. And absence has always had a strange authority over the human mind. As the story spread, its details grew more unsettling. Tales emerged of impossible properties, of animals, of government attention, of land made inaccessible, of a witness who seemed to slip out of public view as quickly as he had arrived. None of this was verified in a way that would satisfy science. Much of it remains in the territory of folklore, embellished memory, and collective suggestion. Yet that uncertainty may be the reason the story survived. It offered not proof, but atmosphere, not evidence, but a wound in the map. There is something revealing in that. We do not only fear what is beneath us, we fear the possibility that the familiar world rests on openings we cannot interpret. Whether Mel's Hole was a hoax, a misunderstanding, or a modern myth born from the old human instinct to give mystery a location, it still tells us something true. When people stand at the edge of darkness and cannot see the end, they begin to ask not only what is down there, But what part of themselves is looking back into it? What if the ground beneath an ancient city was not empty, but layered with centuries of breath, prayer, and survival? In central Turkey, the soft volcanic stone of Cappadocia holds one of the most astonishing underground landscapes ever shaped by human hands. Here, beneath the wind-carved valleys and pale rock towers, entire communities carved downward into the earth, building spaces not for curiosity, but for endurance. The darkness below was not accidental. It was designed. Derinkuyu is often described as an underground city, but that phrase barely contains its emotional weight. It reached through multiple levels, deep enough to shelter thousands of people, along with animals, food stores, water sources, chapels, schools, and ventilation shafts. Narrow passages could be sealed with massive circular stones. Rooms opened into other rooms with the quiet logic of necessity. Everything about the place suggests a world built under pressure, where architecture became a form of collective memory and defense. To walk through such a place, even in imagination, is to feel history change scale. The past stops being an abstraction and becomes intimate. You can picture the scrape of sandals on stone, the low voices, the stored grain, the lamp smoke, the waiting. Above ground, empires shifted and danger moved across the landscape. Below ground, people made another kind of geography, one measured not by borders, but by refuge. The city beneath the city was less a secret than a strategy for continuing life when open space no longer felt safe. And yet Derinkuyu is more than a monument to fear. It is also a testament to human adaptation, to the ability to transform constraint into ingenuity. What begins as a cave can become a home. What begins as shelter can become a civilization in miniature. When we look at places like this, we are reminded that history is not only written in palaces, roads, and battlefields. Sometimes it is carved in silence below our feet, where survival leaves no skyline, only depth. And perhaps that raises a quiet question. How much of human resilience has always existed out of sight? What if the Earth did not simply crack open, but remembered how to release what it had kept for ages? In Siberia, the ground is often imagined as permanent, frozen, sealed, almost beyond time. But permanence is a fragile illusion. In recent years, vast craters have appeared across the Arctic landscape, sudden wounds in the permafrost, as if the planet itself had exhaled from somewhere deep below. Their circular walls plunge into ice and darkness, opening questions before they offer answers. To scientists, these formations are linked to pressure, methane, and thawing ground. Gas accumulates beneath the frozen surface, then bursts upward with tremendous force, leaving behind a steep-sided shaft that can descend into hidden cavities. It is a geological explanation, and a compelling one. Yet even within that explanation, there is something disquieting. Because once the blast is over, what remains is not just a crater, it is an entrance, a glimpse into underworlds that had been sealed for centuries, perhaps millennia, by cold. Long before modern expeditions, indigenous stories in the region spoke of forbidden places beneath the tundra, of openings connected to danger, sickness, or realms not meant for the living. Such accounts are often dismissed when science arrives, as if one kind of language must erase the other. But sometimes two ways of seeing point toward the same mystery from different directions. One speaks in myth, the other in data. Both begin with the recognition that the surface is not the whole story. As Siberia warms, things once held outside history are returning to view. ancient animal remains, artifacts, landscapes, and underground spaces that no living person has known. The thaw is not only environmental, it is archival. The frozen earth is becoming legible again, and what it reveals may be less a single secret than an unsettling pattern. Entire worlds can exist just beneath our assumptions, preserved until the climate or fate decides to uncover them. That may be the deepest unease these places leave behind. Not that the unknown is hiding somewhere far away, but that it has been under our feet all along, waiting for the ice to loosen its grip. What if the deepest mysteries are not the ones hidden by darkness, but the ones concealed by water? Off the coast of Belize, the sea opens into a near-perfect circle of blue, so dark it seems painted into the Caribbean by another hand. From above, the Great Blue Hole looks almost abstract, a geometric absence in the living brightness of coral. But beneath that calm surface lies a vertical world shaped over immense stretches of time, a cave system born when sea levels were lower and the land itself carried the architecture of hidden chambers. Long before it became a destination for divers and satellite photographs, this place was part of a dry limestone landscape. Rain, gravity, and chemical patience carved tunnels and caverns into the rock. Then the oceans rose. The chambers flooded. What had once belonged to the underground became part of the sea, and the old cave kept its structure even after the world around it changed. Stalactites still mark the interior, impossible evidence that this submerged abyss was once open to air. There is something haunting about that transformation. A cave usually suggests descent into the earth, but here the descent begins through water, through wavering light, through a silence broken only by breath and current. Divers move downward past reef life and color into a darker, older architecture where oxygen becomes a calculation and the body becomes aware of its own fragility. Below, hydrogen sulfide forms a ghostly layer in some sections, turning the water into a boundary between worlds. Above it is movement and life. Below it is a harsher, stranger chemistry. The blue hole reminds us that the planet is always revising its own story. Coastlines shift, caverns drown. What once stood inland can become ocean floor. And still, the old shapes remain, carrying memory in stone. To enter such a place is to witness time folded together, the age of caves, the age of rising seas, the age of human curiosity, arriving late to both. Perhaps that is why this place lingers in the imagination. It does not simply ask what is down there. It asks what the world was before we knew how to name it, and what other histories still sleep beneath the surface of the familiar. What if the cave was not empty at all, but alive in a way no one expected? In Romania, beneath an unremarkable stretch of land near the Black Sea, researchers entered a sealed world that had been cut off from the surface for extraordinary lengths of time. Movile Cave did not announce itself with grandeur. It was not the largest, the deepest, or the most visually spectacular. Its power came from something quieter and more unsettling. It seemed to hold an ecosystem that had learned to exist almost entirely without sunlight. The discovery challenged one of the oldest instincts in human thought. We tend to imagine life rising toward light, depending on it, organized around it. But in Movile Cave, life followed another logic. The air was heavy with carbon dioxide and laced with chemicals hostile to ordinary human comfort. The water was rich in sulfur compounds, and yet, within that hostile chemistry, Microorganisms thrived by drawing energy from reactions in the rock and water rather than from the sun. On that invisible foundation, a strange food web emerged, creatures pale, specialized, and adapted to darkness so complete it no longer felt like an absence, but a permanent condition. The animals found they were not monsters from legend. They were smaller, more fragile, and in some ways more profound. Insects, spiders, leeches, and other cave-adapted forms moved through a world that had evolved apart, as if time itself had been sealed inside with them. Their existence suggested that isolation does not merely preserve life, it transforms it. Given enough separation, enough chemical opportunity, enough patience, nature writes new answers to old biological questions. That is why Movile Cave matters far beyond its narrow chambers. It offers a glimpse of how life can persist in places once thought impossible, and by extension, how it might arise or endure on other worlds. But even before it becomes a scientific analogy, it is a human revelation. The cave reminds us that reality is wider than our habits of perception. Entire systems can flourish in conditions we would call unlivable, and truth can exist beyond the reach of ordinary light. Perhaps the lesson is not simply that life is resilient. It is that life is more imaginative than we are, forever finding forms we have not yet learned to expect. What if the most extraordinary chamber on Earth was also one of the least survivable? In northern Mexico, deep beneath the Chihuahuan Desert, miners searching through the Nika system opened a path into a place that seemed less discovered than dreamed. Inside stood crystals of selenite so immense they looked like fallen columns from another age, some stretching longer than a city bus, pale and translucent in the heat. The cave of the crystals did not resemble a hidden room. It felt like entering the slow interior of geological time itself. These formations were not created by sudden violence, but by patience almost beyond imagination. For hundreds of thousands of years, mineral-rich water filled the chamber under conditions of remarkable stability. Temperature, chemistry, and stillness aligned with rare precision, allowing gypsum crystals to grow at a pace so gradual it resisted ordinary understanding. What emerged was not decoration, but architecture on a scale that made the human body seem temporary and small. Every surface held the impression of time working without hurry, yet the cave could barely be visited. Its air was dangerously hot and saturated with moisture, a combination that overwhelms the body with frightening speed. To enter required protective equipment, careful planning, and brief windows of exposure. This gave the chamber a strange emotional character. It was visible, but not habitable, present, but almost unreachable. Human beings could witness it, study it, marvel at it, yet never belong there for long. Beauty, in this case, came with conditions that excluded us. There is something deeply moving in that exclusion. We often speak as though discovery completes a place, as though seeing something grants us a kind of ownership over it. But Nika resists that instinct. It reminds us that wonder does not need us in order to exist. The crystals were forming long before anyone arrived, and will remain part of the Earth's unfinished story long after observers have gone. Perhaps that is why the cave feels so haunting. It is not merely a hidden chamber, full of giant crystals. It is a lesson in scale, in humility, and in the strange grace of a world that continues to create magnificence beyond the limits of human comfort. We entered for a moment, and the cave quietly made clear that it was never built for us. What if the cave did not descend into darkness, but opened into a hidden season of the earth? In Vietnam, Beyond dense jungle and river mist, explorers entered a limestone world and found a chamber so vast it seemed to contain its own atmosphere. Son Doong was not simply large, it was disorienting in scale, a place where the ceiling vanished into shadow, where clouds could gather inside, and where parts of the roof had collapsed so completely that sunlight poured down into the depths like revelation. Inside those collapsed sections, the cave became something almost impossible to classify. Forests took root in the sinkholes. Ferns, vines, insects, birds, and monkeys moved through pockets of jungle nourished by light that had found its way underground. Elsewhere, the passage widened into colossal halls lined with formations shaped by water, mineral, and time. A traveler could stand within it and feel the categories of landscape begin to fail. Was this a cave, a valley, a buried river corridor, or an isolated world with its own internal weather? The answer, somehow, was all of them at once. That complexity is part of what gives Son Doong its emotional force. We often imagine hidden places as sealed and lifeless, cut off from change. But this cave is alive with transition. Light meets darkness. Surface ecosystems reach downward. Underground geology rises into open air. The boundaries we rely on, inside and outside, buried and exposed, known and unknown, grow porous here. The cave does not fit neatly into a human definition because nature was never concerned with our need for neatness. There is also a tenderness in the way this place remained concealed for so long. A local man knew of it before the world did, hearing wind and water pour from an opening in the forest, sensing something immense without fully entering it. That detail matters. Discovery is rarely a single, dramatic moment. More often, it begins as intuition, hesitation, a glimpse at the edge of certainty. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson of Son Doong. Some of the most astonishing places on Earth are not hidden because they are small, but because the world is still large enough to keep them. And when they are finally seen, they do not simply enlarge our maps, they enlarge our idea of what the planet has been doing all this time without our notice. What if the cave was not hidden beneath wilderness, but beneath the memory of an entire civilization? On the Giza plateau, where the pyramids have long stood as symbols of permanence, attention usually rises towards stone, sky, and royal ambition. But every monument that climbs upward begins by descending into the earth. Beneath the visible architecture of ancient Egypt lies another dimension of history. Shafts, chambers, passages, and unfinished spaces that remind us the ancient world was built as much below ground as above it. For generations, explorers, archaeologists, and storytellers have been drawn to the possibility that deeper structures may still exist beneath Giza. Some claims have been rigorous, others speculative, and many have blurred into popular myth. Cavities have been detected. Hidden spaces have been discussed. New technologies have suggested anomalies without always explaining them. This is where the emotional gravity of the site becomes complicated. Giza is not merely an archaeological zone. It is a place where evidence, longing, national history, and human imagination continually overlap. That overlap can mislead. The desire for a final secret beneath the pyramids often says as much about us as it does about Egypt. We want revelation equal to the scale of the monuments. We want a chamber untouched, a text unread, a room that changes everything. But the deeper truth may be quieter and, in its own way, more profound. Even without a sensational discovery, the underground world of Giza already tells a remarkable story about labor, ritual, death, engineering, and the ancient attempt to bind Earth to eternity. The chambers that are known are not footnotes to the pyramids. They are part of their meaning. To descend there, even in thought, is to enter a civilization's relationship with the unseen. Ancient builders understood that what is hidden can be as important as what is displayed. Passageways, burial spaces, and sealed voids were not simply structural choices. They were expressions of belief, order, and continuity between worlds. Perhaps that is why Giza continues to haunt modern imagination. Not because it guarantees a buried answer, but because it confronts us with a difficult form of mystery. The possibility that some places remain powerful, not by revealing everything, but by teaching us how much reverence uncertainty can hold. What if a cave could preserve not only bones and tools, but the outline of a human story on the edge of being lost? In South Africa, the Rising Star cave system does not impress first as a spectacle. It is narrow, difficult, and physically demanding, a place that resists easy access. Yet within those constricted passages, researchers encountered something extraordinary. A chamber holding the remains of an ancient human relative, Homo naledi, in numbers and circumstances that raised profound questions about who these beings were and how they understood death. The discovery mattered not simply because of the fossils, but because of what their placement seemed to suggest. Bodies did not appear randomly scattered by floodwater or predator activity. Instead, the evidence pointed toward deliberate deposition deep within the cave, in darkness far removed from ordinary living space. If that interpretation holds, then a small-brained hominin once moved through a hazardous underground environment to place its dead in a secluded chamber. Such an act would complicate old assumptions about cognition, ritual, and the relationship between intelligence and symbolic behavior. That is what makes Rising Star so moving. It unsettles the neat hierarchy many people still carry within them. The idea that human depth arrived all at once, belonging fully only to the most recent version of ourselves. But evolution is rarely that tidy. The cave suggests that tenderness, intention, or at least repeated care may have deeper roots than we imagined. It hints that the desire to respond to death with action, with placement, return, or remembrance may not be a late cultural invention, but part of a longer and more complex human inheritance. At the same time, the site teaches caution. Interpretation in paleoanthropology is always partial, always shaped by the fragments that endure and the many more that do not. A cave can preserve evidence, but it also preserves silence. Between skeletons and sediment lies a vast field of uncertainty. Still, uncertainty does not diminish the wonder. It makes the wonder honest. Perhaps that is the enduring power of Rising Star. In a chamber reached only by squeezing through stone, we are confronted not with a stranger, but with a relative whose life remains partly unread. And in that darkness, the past feels less distant than intimate, as though memory itself has been waiting underground for us to become humble enough to listen. What if the cave was not merely a shelter from history, but one of its most fragile archives? In the limestone landscapes of Europe and Indonesia, deep walls, once lit by flickering fire, became surfaces for some of humanity's earliest known images. Horses, bison, hands, abstract signs, hunted animals, shifting forms half seen in stone. These were not casual decorations. They were marks made in darkness, where access required effort and intention, where silence and torchlight transformed rock into a place of encounter. To enter a painted cave, even through photographs or careful recreations, is to feel time lose its usual distance. The figures are ancient, but the gesture behind them is immediately recognizable. Someone stood before this wall, mixed pigment, raised a hand, and chose to leave a trace. Not a monument visible to a kingdom, not an inscription for a ruler, but an image hidden underground, where only a few might ever see it. That fact alone changes the meaning of art. These places suggest that image making was never only about display. It was also about ritual, memory, relation, and perhaps the need to bring inner life into material form. The cave itself shaped that expression. Uneven surfaces gave bodies motion. Shadows made animals appear to move. Acoustics may have turned chambers into environments of echo and performance. What survives on the walls is therefore only part of the event. The rest belonged to voices, footsteps, breath, fear, reverence, and the living moment in which humans discovered that imagination could inhabit stone. In that sense, the cave was not just a canvas. It was one of the first theaters of consciousness, and yet these archives are painfully vulnerable. Moisture, heat, microbes, and even human admiration can erase what thousands of years preserved. We arrive wanting to witness origins, and our presence threatens the very traces we seek. That tension feels deeply modern, and to know something is often to endanger it. To preserve it, we must accept distance. Perhaps that is the quiet wisdom these painted caverns offer. Long before cities, books, or recorded history, people entered the earth and left behind evidence not only that they lived, but that they wondered. In the dark, they made images, and across the vastness of time, those images still ask us a simple, haunting question. What does it mean to be remembered? What if the cave did not open onto treasure or ruins, but onto a mirror of our own future? In Antarctica and other polar regions, scientists have found hidden spaces beneath ice and within volcanic systems where darkness, isolation, cold, and chemistry combine into conditions almost alien to ordinary life. These are not the caves of folklore. They are laboratories of endurance, places where the Earth quietly rehearses possibilities that may one day help us understand other worlds. Inside such environments, life is often sparse, microbial, and astonishingly adaptive. Organisms persist with minimal light or none at all, drawing energy from minerals, chemical gradients, or heat rising from deep below. In icy caves, delicate formations hang like frozen breath. In subglacial spaces, water moves beneath immense pressure, cut off from the weather and rhythms of the surface. These places feel remote not only geographically, but conceptually. They challenge the intuition that habitability must resemble comfort, that life needs the same conditions we prefer. That is why caves at the edge of the world have become important to more than geology. They help scientists imagine Mars, Europa, Enceladus, worlds where surface conditions may be harsh, but where protected subsurface environments could shelter chemistry, water, or even forms of life. The search beyond Earth often begins by looking more carefully beneath our own feet. The hidden cave becomes a kind of translator between planets, a reminder that nature has more than one method for keeping possibility alive. And yet the emotional force of these places is not only scientific, they reveal something about us. We are creatures who stand on one world and use its strangest corners to imagine another. We descend into ice, darkness, and stone, not simply to gather data, but to test the reach of hope. Every hidden chamber suggests that the universe may be less barren than it appears from a distance. Perhaps that is the deeper meaning of these polar and subsurface worlds. They teach us that the unknown is not always empty. Sometimes it is waiting in conditions we once dismissed, quietly asking whether our imagination is broad enough to meet reality where it truly lives. What if every cave in this story, no matter how different, was leading toward the same realization? Some opened into folklore, others into science. Some held crystals, some ancient bones, some underground cities, some ecosystems that seem to rewrite the rules of life itself. Yet beneath all these differences lies a common pattern. Each descent begins with the belief that the world is mostly known, and ends with the recognition that knowledge is always provisional. The cave becomes more than a place. It becomes a method of humbling the human mind. That may be why subterranean spaces have remained so powerful across cultures and centuries. They gather meanings easily because they already embody a paradox. A cave is both shelter and threat, archive and erasure, refuge and disorientation. It can protect paintings for millennia, or conceal the dead beyond memory. It can preserve stable chemical worlds untouched by sunlight, or collapse without warning under the pressure of time. To go underground is to enter a realm where opposites coexist, where certainty has less authority than attention. Modern science has illuminated many of these spaces with lasers, sensors, mapping tools, and biochemical analysis. And still, each answer seems to widen, rather than close, the mystery. We learn how a chamber formed, and then confront the deeper question of what it meant to those who entered it. We explain an ecosystem, and then wonder how many others still remain sealed away. We date a fossil, map a shaft, identify a mineral, and yet the emotional truth persists. The Earth is not merely a surface inhabited by humans, but a layered world whose hidden interiors continue to shape our sense of reality. There is also something intimate about that layered world. We speak of the planet as though it were external, an object to be studied. But caves remind us that we too are creatures of interiority. We carry hidden chambers of memory, fear, hope, and unfinished thought. Perhaps that is why the descent into stone feels so familiar. It mirrors another descent, the inward one. And so, by the time we reach the end of these journeys, the question is no longer simply what lies below. The deeper question is what kind of species keeps returning to darkness, not only to conquer it, but to understand itself within it. Maybe the answer is this. We go underground because some truths can only be approached indirectly by following the echo rather than the map. In the end, the caves were never just about what they contained. They were about what they revealed in us. We entered looking for anomalies, legends, fossils, lost chambers, strange ecosystems, impossible crystals, and forgotten cities. We emerged with those things, yes, but also with something less measurable and perhaps more enduring, a changed sense of scale. Not only the scale of the Earth, but the scale of human understanding within it. Again and again, these hidden places asked us to surrender a familiar illusion, the comforting belief that the world becomes less mysterious as knowledge expands. In truth, the opposite often happens. Each discovery redraws the border of the unknown. A bottomless legend becomes a study in myth and longing. An underground city becomes a portrait of resilience. A sealed cave becomes evidence that life can thrive beyond the rules we thought were fixed. A painted chamber becomes proof that even our earliest ancestors were reaching beyond survival toward meaning. The deeper we looked, the less complete the surface appeared. And maybe that is the most human lesson of all. We are not diminished by mystery. We are refined by it. To admit that hidden worlds still exist beneath deserts, beneath pyramids, beneath forests, beneath ice, beneath the sea, is not to confess ignorance in defeat. It is to accept reality in its full dignity. The Earth is older, subtler, and more imaginative than any one era can fully describe. We inherit only a fragment of its story, and even that fragment is enough to fill a lifetime with wonder. There is a reason the image of a cave has endured across mythology, religion, philosophy, and science. It speaks to the threshold between what is known and what must be approached slowly. It reminds us that revelation is rarely immediate. Most truths do not arrive in floodlight. They emerge by degrees, in the patience of careful descent, in the willingness to sit with uncertainty long enough for shape to appear. So perhaps that is where this journey leaves us, not with a final answer, but with a better question. If so much of the world remains hidden until someone dares to enter the dark, what else in history, in nature, or in ourselves is still waiting to be found? And when we finally reach those places, will we discover new worlds below us, or simply a deeper understanding of what it means to be human on this one?